from the depth instant tutorial.
It's Eric here, and today we're going to talk about missile guidance. I actually had some other videos planned, but I didn't have time to make them this week, so next week. But that shouldn't mean you get no tutorial, so I will do this one instead. That is about missile guidance and what guidance can be used and what can be recommended. All guidance in From the Depth requires that you will use fins to steer the missile or turning thrusters. Turning thrusters are much faster but less accurate, but they take fuel, so that's why most people usually use fins, but for some places you might need to have some turning thrusters to make them turn fast enough. The only guidance that does not require that you have any fins or turning thrusters, that is magnets. Magnets can be placed anywhere on the missile. You can have several of them, and you can set the range of the magnet and the start delay, for example. So, then we have the other thing that does require fins or turning thrusters, and that is the one-turn system. You can set the downrange aim distance thing. It's usually pretty good as default. It will turn the missile towards the enemy that you or your vehicle see when you fire the missile, and it will activate before guidance activates. One turn is usually not required, but for some systems it can be beneficial to make sure that the missile is pointed towards the enemy before the guidance is activated. Right now we're going to test the combination of one turn, so that the missile will be fired towards the enemy, and magnet, so that it would go to the enemy later when it sits in the water. We're gonna use a short-range thruster to launch it there fast. These are some more exotic guidance systems, so I just wanted to show you them first. Fire. And again, the missiles are not really guided. They are just trying to turn towards the enemy because we set the enemy position when it was launched. Now we can see that the fuel has ran out and it just drops into the water. About this time, you will see that the magnets on the missiles are activated, but they did not reach him. Setting start delay will help these missiles turn a little bit more towards the enemy before the thrusters gets activated. And there we are, dropped into the water. The magnets are now activated and will go towards the boat. But they are a little bit too slow. Let's try with 3 magnets instead. And there we go. Magnets are being activated and they can easily catch up with the boat. So while magnets can be useful for bombs and depth charges, it's usually not the best guidance type. The rest of the guidance we will go through will of course only use fins and turning thrusters. For all intents and purposes we will using fins to try all of them. But turning thrusters works as well. Fins and turning thrusters are best placed in the back or the front of the missile. If you want a missile to be extremely maneuverable and really get all the benefits from that guidance, using fins is a good idea in the front. Now this will make the missile a lot slower, but if you have big problems of making your missiles even hit and they are fast enough, it can be a good idea to have fins in the front, even though you will get a much slower speed. Let's try out this little missile that uses explosives, fins in the back and front, and having the active radar seekr. The active radar seekr is the best guidance systems for airborne missiles generally. Launch. And when using that, you should have a identify friend or foe module onto your missile system. If you do not, they will target your vehicle as well. The radar guidance uses its own guiding systems, so you will not need to steer it manually, it will find the targets automatically. Very handy. Well, if your missiles are hitting decoys and stuff like that, you'll need to have some countermeasures against that. The signal processor helps your missiles not being tricked by enemy decoys. The other general guidance system that is available is the infrared seekr. The infrared seekr works just like the radar, but it is looking for hot targets instead. The infrared seekers are good at hitting things that are looking very hot to it. However, a lot of different crafts are not looking particularly hot, and they thus have a big problem at even detecting enemy crafts. Without any decoys, they can hit the target, but as new decoys are launched, they are failing to hit the target. And this is even though we are actually having a signal processor in there. So while signal processor helps your missiles of not getting tricked by enemy decoys, well, if you are having that on a medium missile and shooting it against something with medium decoys, you're probably not going to be able to bypass that, even though you have a signal processor. Active radar seekers and infrared seekers are very similar in searching in a big arc and finding enemies. However, in my experience, the active radar seekers is much better than the infrared seekers for basically any occasion. My recommendation is to use always active radar seekers and never infrared seekers for almost all cases. Now we get over to some other interesting types of guidance. The equivalent to active radar seekers and infrared seekers is of course torpedo sonars. Torpedo sonars work the same way as them, but underwater. Torpedo sonars is basically your only option for underwater active targeting if you're not going to resort to mines. There is another option though, and that is remote guidance, which we are going to look a little bit later on. First, we're going to go through the other active guiding systems. Laser designators is a really little cool block that will aim towards a laser. You can set them to aim at our lasers, vehicles' lasers, or even the team's lasers, which is usually a smart idea. The cool thing with laser designators is that your missile will actually become a little bit faster when you're using them instead of radars and stuff. The downside, however, is that it will require laser emitter to even work. The laser designator, you also need to set them up, which missiles they will be able to control. Setting them to my team's missiles can be smart so that you can actually have other things providing the targeting point while other vehicles launch the missiles. When you have this, you will become a laser pointer. And this laser pointer is very accurate at providing a good point for your missiles to actually hit, and can even be changed mid-flight. So you saw that we actually looked away a little bit, so the missiles actually didn't hit a target. Now we're going to make sure that this laser pointer is pointing towards the enemy, and then you can see we can ensure an impact. If you're using a system like this, you need to make sure that you must have contact with the enemy with your lasers. If you do not, your missiles will not hit, as just seen. Laser designators is one of the quickest and fastest and best guidance systems there are in From the Depth, with the downside that you need to have contact with the enemy by looking at it with your laser pointers. The next thing that is guidance is single pixel IR seeker. The single pixel IR will probably not see this target good enough because it's not really that hot, so we're going to add a one turn to be able to even try and make them work. These are the only active guidance system that is fast enough and can provide a good thrust. But this target we're shooting at is simply not hot enough. The single pixel IR seekers are only useful if you're, for example, firing them from a very fast aircraft towards another very fast aircraft and you're trying to lock onto their jet engine. The cool thing about them is that they are a little bit harder to trick with decoys, but they will not even work with the signal processors, so it's a trade-off there. Generally, they need to be fired at a very narrow angle towards the target if you're not going to have one turn. And again, is mostly useful for fighter systems or fighter crafts only. Then we have some other heads that are not guidance. We have a thumper head, and that's if you want to make kinetic missiles and deal hollow point damage basically. If you want to have a missile that basically deals impact like a hollow point cram or APS shell, well then thumper head is your friend, best combined with reinforced bodies. The other thing that's really cool is D-shaped charge, and the only thing that is really recommended if you're going to have the other guidance systems we're going to talk about now. Now, it's a requirement, of course, if you want to have a kinetic missile, that you have these types of guidance as well, but kinetic missiles are usually not as good as charge missiles. The shape charge is basically a heat shell, so that's really cool. We can deal some serious damage with this. So if you want to have a heat or shape charge torpedo or missile, how are you going to guide this thing? You do have a very few options of doing this. The laser beam riders works just as laser designators. However, they can only be steered from your vehicle's lasers. You cannot use other vehicles' lasers to be able to steer them. So that's the problem. However, it's a very good way if you want to have a shape charge and you have contact with the enemy, you can make them hit very well. There is still a weird thing here. If we just fire them, they will not be able to even see the lasers, so you can't even hit the target. They basically need to be launched in the same direction you want to fire. Or you'll need to do like this, which is, of course, doesn't make much sense, does it? Even though lasers are super good, it can be a little bit difficult to have to aim them in the same direction if you want to use shape charges. And then you only have one option left, and that is remote guidance. Remote guidance also works for torpedoes. If you want to have heat torpedoes, remote guidance is the only thing you need. Remote guidance, however, is very hard to work with because you will need a very expensive AI to even work on them. They even have a mode where they self-destruct if we launch a new missile, so that you are not overusing general processing power. Each of these missiles require 1.5 general processing power, which is this piece from the AI, which you can add on. And each general processing card is costing you 100. But let us remote steer these missiles by controlling them with our player, then it doesn't care of the general processing power. You can see that these remote guided heat missiles are now hitting the target, and they work also, of course, for torpedoes. There is one more guidance system which is a little bit complex, and that is the Lua receiver. Lua is a programming language, and you can learn to program it and use it with a Lua box, and you can then basically have your programmable missiles. But that's all the different guiding systems there are. Now, if you for example have remote guidance or radar or even an interceptor, whatever you have, you can always combine this with prediction guidance, which helps the missile hit the enemy at their intercept point, or APN guidance, which basically does the same but just much better. Now, this doesn't help a lot for a super slow target like this, but having APN guidance is absolutely vital if you want to have any chance of hitting enemy planes or any type of super fast craft. It's actually extremely rare that you don't want to have APN guidance. APN guidance is almost the answer for any type of missile system, especially considering that they are giving a lot of free internal space, so for many systems you don't even need a designated fuel tank. Having APN guidance combined with the active radar seekr is one of my most favorite types of guidance systems there are. It always works super fine and will almost always hit the target. Well, I hope I was able to teach you everything you needed to know about missile guidance systems. If you have any questions, post them down in the comments and make sure to like the video and of course subscribe for more. Huge thanks to all our commissioned officers in the army of Gmodism, which you can join there if you want to. So, Commodore Owen, our lieutenants, Antor, Cray V, Parbag Reed, Vincent Veritas, Scooby Rocks, Sig Hot, and our new lieutenant, Rick Proel. And of course, big thanks to all our cadets. Also, thanks to everyone in the ecclesiarchy, which you can see with badges under the comments, because they are, of course, YouTube members. This is your host, Eric of Gmodism. We'll be back next week with more videos.